A Roman legionary gave 25 of his best years to the empire. He marched thousands of miles, built roads across unknown lands, and stood guard on frozen frontiers while the world slept. And then one day, the army told him he was done. No more orders, no more brothers beside him, just silence. So what happened next? What did Rome actually do with the men who gave everything and were suddenly too old to fight? Let's start at the very beginning, not with old soldiers, but with young ones. Because to understand what happened to a Roman soldier at the end, you have to understand what he went through from day one. In the earliest days of the Roman Republic, soldiers were not professionals. They were property-owning citizens, ordinary, farmers and landowners. They brought their own weapons, their own armor, and met a minimum wealth threshold just to qualify for service. The whole idea was simple. These farmer soldiers would serve for a short campaign, then go home and get back to their normal lives. They'd work their land until the next call came. There was no need for pensions, no need for retirement programs. These men already had something to come back to, but Rome was growing fast. As wars became longer and more distant, recruitment numbers declined. The expansion of the Republic forced soldiers to fight in more and more distant regions, and that caused real problems. Some Roman soldiers deployed to places like Spain would not return to their farms for 6 consecutive years. Think about that. 6 years away from home, 6 years away from the land that fed your family. When some of these men finally came back, their farms were gone, their families were struggling, and the life they once knew had vanished. In response, the general Gaius Marius reformed the military and allowed landless citizens to join the legions. Through his military reforms around 107 BC, Marius opened recruitment to the capite censi, the landless poor, for the first time. Although envisioned as a practical measure to solve recruitment issues, the reforms would have a profound socio-economic and political legacy. The state now equipped these men and, in return, promised a grant of land after service. That promise gave rise to the expectation of a retirement reward, and here is where everything changed. These new soldiers had nothing of their own, no farms, no property, no fallback. The capite censi relied on the military for their retirement. Lacking land or livelihood of their own, they required benefits such as land grants once their service was completed. The Senate refused to create retirement programs for these veterans, and this precipitated a radical shift in loyalties, as wealthy generals superseded the state as the guarantors of their soldiers' future livelihoods. This is the moment the Roman military became something far more dangerous than an army. It became a political weapon. The care for soldiers' retirement was put not on the Roman Senate, but on individual generals, and that created an unhealthy economic dependency. Soon soldiers were no longer loyal to the Republic. They were loyal to the general who promised to secure their retirement. That put events into motion that would weaken and eventually end the Roman Republic. Now, imagine being one of those soldiers. You signed your life away in your late teens or early 20s. On entering the army, a recruit would have signed on for a period of 25 years. Normally, he would have been 18 to 22 years of age on entry. That means by the time you were done, you were in your mid-40s. You had spent your entire youth marching, building, and standing at the edges of the known world. Many soldiers faced years campaigning on foreign soil, months spent building roads, bridges, and fortifications, and long stretches of monotonous garrison duty. And there was something else, something deeply personal that most people never think about. By law, Roman soldiers were forbidden to marry while in active service. Naturally, that rule proved very difficult to enforce and was often ignored. Retirement also became the occasion for soldiers to officially recognize their wife and children and to settle with them. In the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, Roman soldiers were forbidden legitimate marriage during service. Nevertheless, many soldiers formed de facto marriages. So for 25 years, a soldier could have a partner, could have children, but none of it was legally recognized. His children, in the eyes of Rome, were technically illegitimate. His partner had no legal protection. Only when he retired did that change. Only when the army finally let him go could he become, in the eyes of the law, a husband and a father. So, what exactly did Rome offer these men when their service was finally over? At the end of service stood the onesta missio, the honorable discharge. It was marked by a formal ceremony, the granting of proof of service, and the award of whatever benefits the state had promised: land, cash, citizenship, exemption from certain civic duties, and the right to marry legally, the real. Turning point came under Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The aerarium militare was the military treasury of imperial Rome. It was instituted by Augustus as a permanent revenue source for pensions for veterans of the imperial Roman army. The treasury derived its funding from new taxes, an inheritance tax and a sales tax, and regularized the ad hoc provisions for veterans that, under the Republic, had often involved socially disruptive confiscation of property. This was revolutionary. For the first time, veterans' retirement was backed by a dedicated government fund, not by the whims of a powerful general, but by the state itself. Although the length of service was increased from 16 years on active duty to 20, and 5 years in the reserves, the pension system was explicitly funded through a 5% tax on inheritances and a 1% tax on all transactions conducted through auctions. Retiring legionnaires were to receive 3,000 denarii in a lump sum. At the time, that represented roughly 13 times a legionnaire's annual salary. At the end of Augustus's reign, the pension for a praetorian guard was 20,000 sesterces, and that of a legionary was 12,000. And why did Augustus do all this? Because he understood something the Senate never had. The historian Suetonius saw the aerarium militare as a response to the uncertainty of retired military men in need who might be inclined to support a coup or foment unrest. A state-supported benefit helped redirect the former soldier's loyalty from his immediate commanding officer to the Roman state as a whole. Augustus was not just being generous, he was being strategic. He knew that unpaid, angry veterans were the most dangerous force in the empire. In his own records, Augustus said that more than 300,000 veterans were settled in colonies, while 600 million sesterces were spent acquiring land in Italy, and another 260 million on land in the provinces. According to modern historians, during the period from Sulla to Augustus, approximately 500,000 veterans received land allotments in Italy. This was the largest redistribution of landed property since the Roman conquest. Now, picture these: old soldiers arriving at their new homes. In North Africa, Thamagadi, modern-day Timgad in Algeria, stands out as a classic example of a carefully planned Roman veteran colony. It was founded by Emperor Trajan around 100 AD, and it housed retired legionaries from the 3rd Augustan Legion. Its streets followed a perfect grid, and its public structures included a theater, baths, and a forum. Veterans also settled in Philippi, Corinth, and Carthage. After defeating Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, Octavian awarded lands in Macedonia to his soldiers. Corinth had been refounded by Julius Caesar in 44 BC as a colony for veterans, while Carthage was later set up again by Augustus in 29 BC following his victory at Actium. These weren't just retirement communities. Veteran colonies were instruments of Romanization, engines of economic development, strategic strongholds, and symbols of the rewards Rome offered its loyal soldiers. Through them, Rome extended the reach of its culture, law, and influence across 3 continents. Through a carefully managed policy of land distribution, Rome turned its retired soldiers into settlers who extended Roman identity across both Italy and the wider provinces. Their presence helped maintain peace, deter rebellion, and ensure the integration of new territories into the imperial system. Veteran colonies were both homes and outposts, reinforcing Roman power in the most practical way possible. Many veterans who received money instead of land used their retirement funds to start small businesses, often as suppliers to the Roman army. Since they were veterans, they could count on favorable treatment from the military. Most of these businesses were started in civilian settlements just outside Roman army camps. A significant number of veterans, after retiring, settled in Canabae, trading posts that spontaneously arose outside the gates of military camps. Administrative positions were also available to veterans, helping them become prominent members of local society. But here's something that kept every retired soldier connected to the world he left behind. Veterans could be called back into the service of the Legion as evocati at the request of a commander, provided they agreed. Veterans served as a reserve force, evocati in Latin, in case of emergency. Even after long years in the army, they never completely left the service of Rome. Not every discharge was the same, though. There was also premature discharge for health reasons, called missio causaria, and in most cases, men discharged for health reasons were treated like honorably discharged soldiers, though the extent of their benefits was based on their length of service. Additionally, disabled Roman veterans were exempted from paying taxes. Dishonorable discharge, the missio ignominiosa, was the punishment for soldiers found guilty of serious crimes. These men were forbidden by law to live in Rome or enter the imperial service. They enjoyed none of the rights and privileges granted to honorably discharged soldiers. Auxiliary soldiers, called peregrini, non-Roman citizens of the empire, usually received Roman citizenship and connubium, the legal permission to marry, for themselves and their descendants along with honorable discharge. Their discharge orders might also include rights to cash and land, poll tax exemption for up to 4 people, and immunities from various duties. For example, those who desired to set up a business could receive a cash grant, and those desiring land could be given a sizable plot along with 2 oxen, cash, and 100 measures of assorted grains. And generation after generation, something remarkable happened. In both East and West, the legions came to rely, to a great extent, on the recruitment of the sons of their own serving and veteran members. An increasing proportion of such men were born and raised in the frontier zones, and probably few had the desire or the opportunity to adopt any other livelihood. Thus was established that voluntary hereditary service, which in the difficult days of the 3rd century was made compulsory. The sons of soldiers became soldiers, the frontier became home. Military service became not just a career, but a family tradition etched into the identity of entire communities along the borders of the empire. By the 3rd and 4th centuries A.D., the classical model of veteran colonies had begun to fade. This reflected deeper transformations in Roman military and economic structures. Late Roman armies were increasingly composed of mobile field units and local frontier troops. Soldiers often came from the provinces in which they served and returned home after discharge, reducing the need for designated colonies. And then came the part of this story that carries the heaviest weight. Some historians trace the beginning of the fall of the Western Roman Empire to the Senate's decision to reduce soldiers' pensions. With less incentive to join the army, Roman citizens turned to different careers. The Senate then filled the ranks with outside recruits, diminishing the cohesion and discipline. These decisions are seen as major contributing factors that led to the fall of Rome. Think about that for a moment. The greatest empire the Western world had ever known did not just fall because of outside pressure. A piece of it crumbled because it forgot the deal. It forgot the promise it had made to the men who stood at its walls. It forgot that the pension, that plot of land, that handful of coins, that simple chance at a quiet life, was never just a reward. It was the glue. The Roman veterans who settled throughout the empire became a kind of cement that held the huge state together. Augustus had understood this over 300 years earlier. He built an entire treasury, taxed the wealthy, and moved hundreds of thousands of veterans onto land across 3 continents, not because he loved his soldiers, but because he knew that an empire is only as strong as the loyalty of the men who defend it. And loyalty, he realized, could not be demanded. It had to be earned. It had to be paid for. When Rome stopped paying that price, when the reward shrank, when the promises grew thin, when no young Roman saw a reason to pick up a sword anymore. The walls did not fall from the outside first. They hollowed out from within.